am Valentine, gallant adventurer. The scary stabby one is Fred.
What about that one?
That's the newbie. It's their first adventure.
Oh, come on. Their figure isn't even fully painted.
Greetings and welcome, I'm Ash, and today I would like to talk to you about Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. A ridiculously over-the-top homage to the RPG genre and a sort of spiritual successor to Borderlands 2's highly popular Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep DLC. Now, as for its quality, with some top-notch gunplay and an excellent cast doing their best at playing completely ridiculous characters as straight as possible, Wonderlands is simply a joy to play. So if you're curious about just what all of this looks like in action, as well as how Wonderlands compares to its predecessor Borderlands 3, allow me to share my thoughts after a very explosion-filled adventure. Like any RPG, Wonderlands starts you off with a detailed character creator. You can adjust everything from your stats to your appearance here, and even fine-tune your voice if you so wish. And trust me, you do, because your character has a surprising amount of dialogue throughout the game, many of which you'll be hearing time and time again. There are 6 classes based on classic RPG archetypes you can choose as your base, which you can then later customize by adding a second class to your build. Combine this with the standard Borderlands-style talent tree and a myriad of unique items, and you'll end up with a great deal of customization options and the potential to create a whole assortment of really fun and really creative character builds. I personally ended up going with the Clawbringer, which is essentially Thor if he had a tiny dragon companion following him around. That ended up being an amazing choice, as my class abilities were so immensely fun to press that I based my entire build around being able to push that button as often as possible. After all, throwing an axe that explodes into lightning or smashing someone into the ground with a gigantic molten hammer is far too enjoyable to be left at the mercy of long cooldowns. The combat in general is highly entertaining thanks to the satisfying combination of spells, abilities, and guns. It doesn't matter if we're talking about a weapon that shoots out missiles that split into other missiles that then explode into even smaller missiles, or even just a classic rifle that simply goes shoot shoot, all of them feel great to use. Basically, if you've played Borderlands 3, the gunplay is pretty much the same here, just with a couple of bells and whistles added to make it stand out. Now, one of these exceptionally large bells is the new magic system, because even though the spells are a completely new addition to the series, they are just as handy, just as random, and just as entertaining to use as the weapons themselves. Some spells simply freeze enemies in place so you can actually hit them, some unleash a shockwave that clears out all of the weaker enemies that like to swarm you, and some go way overboard by conjuring a miniature apocalypse over your target. But regardless of what type of magic you use, it'll be a great addition to your arsenal and something that I really do hope will stick with the series moving forward. The only aspect of the combat I didn't particularly enjoy was the melee system. It didn't matter what type of weapon I was using or how many paragraphs of text it even had, the melee weapons always lacked that little bit of oomph to really make them feel satisfying to use. In a different game, I might have been a lot more forgiving of this, but with the gunplay and magic being so well done, the melee combat just feels like it's lagging behind. Besides all of the glorious combat, there's a fair bit of looting and exploring to be had as well, though thankfully it is kept tame enough that it doesn't break the pacing. I also really do appreciate how all of the collectibles are useful to you in some way and aren't just there to pad out the runtime. The classic chests give you a variety of quality loot. The somewhat rarer golden dice offer much greater quantities of loot and permanently upgrade your magic find, while the extremely rare marbles, just don't even question it, and recordings give you some nicely voice-acted lore to help flesh out the world. So as far as the collectibles and secrets in an action-heavy game are concerned, these are some of the better ones. Much like in the original Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep, the story in Wonderlands is complete and utter nonsense, and the characters are well aware of this. However, in a refreshing twist, instead of using this for a couple of cheap jokes, Wonderlands takes these moments of self-reflection as an opportunity to help build up the characters and give them some small emotional touches. So even though the whole thing is intentionally riddled with cliches from top to bottom, I actually found myself getting invested in Tina's bizarre mishmash of a world. While this is obviously down to personal preference, the humor in Wonderlands is also a lot more palatable to me than in Borderlands 3. I think the main reason for this is that Wonderlands is so insanely over the top that the writers never felt the need to force the characters to act wacky just for the sake of a joke. Instead, they just gave them a silly RPG-themed personality and let them do their own thing, which ended up working out great thanks to the excellent cast. That said, Wonderlands does still have some of the one-note characters that are just there for a lame gag, but they are thankfully few and far between, as well as much easier to ignore when the main crew is this solid. Out of the characters, my favorite is easily Mr. Torque, an explosives-obsessed barbarian that has absolutely no musical talent whatsoever, yet more than makes up for it with sheer enthusiasm. Since Tina is trying to run a, I quote, family-friendly game, Mr. Torque is not allowed to swear, and so every time he wants to yell out something inappropriate, he strums his lute, with the resulting dialogue being just a pure delight to listen to.
I love two things in this world: rap, quest, and huge explosions, and respecting all living beings, irrespective of my own underlying cultural biases. 3 days!
I sadly cannot tell you the specifics due to spoilers, but there is one moment near the halfway point where Mr. Torgue brings a perfectly normal situation to such an absurdly ridiculous conclusion that I was left laughing for a good few minutes afterwards. So if you liked some of his dialogues in Borderlands 2 Campaign of Carnage DLC, you'll be happy to hear that he is somehow even better in Wonderlands. In fact, some of these scripted events are so well paced and pack so much of a punch that I'm genuinely not sure why Wonderlands even has an overworld that you can explore and mess around with. Most of the stuff you can find there is essentially filler, just a bunch of random items to collect and straightforward arenas filled with nameless goons to fight. So to pull you away from the amazing stories in order to show you what amounts to basically nothing just seems like a strange misstep for Wonderlands. A real shame too, because the overworld map is remarkably well crafted. You move around in it by using a miniature bobblehead of your hero, the bridges are made out of matches and ice cream sticks, there's random rule books just floating ominously in the distance, while some of the obstacles you can encounter are just random things Tina had lying around. The whole map has a very impromptu D&D set sort of vibe, and as someone that used to make his own playgrounds back in the day, I found it all to be just straight up adorable. The overworld also has one feature that I would like to see present in every single RPG ever, and that is the ability to smack a random encounter monster over the head and continue on your merry way without being harassed. So if you want to fight everything for experience and loot, you have the ability to do that. But if you just want to explore the world without any sort of interruption, you get to do that by just smacking a monster away. It is really the perfect solution. I am pleased to say that the rest of the Wonderlands is really lovely to look at as well. It might not be the most graphically advanced game around, but none of that really matters when Wonderland's environments and enemies are this colorful, this varied, and this charming. I am also a big sucker for that classic Borderlands-style cel-shaded look, which in Wonderland's case works exceptionally well since it fits that whole RPG aesthetic. The monsters are also quite engaging themselves, with many of them being parodies of classic RPG monsters like skeletons, goblins, or byrons. While they definitely could use some more to add a bit of variety, I can't deny I loved listening to the skeletons rattle off some of the lamest bone jokes around. So, outside of some of the overworld maps repeating a bit too often, I feel like Wonderlands has done a wonderful job of parodying RPGs without actually being mean-spirited about it. Performance has also been solid for me throughout my adventure, with only the occasional dip below 60 FPS when there was a ton of explosions and enemies on the screen. In terms of bugs, however, I did run into a whole bunch of small annoyances. The most aggravating of these was a reoccurring bug that would make my quest log invisible for a seemingly undetermined amount of time after loading into a new area. These types of issues weren't serious enough to make me properly angry with Wonderlands, but they did get pretty close on occasion. So if you do decide to dive in yourself, be prepared to power through some bugs in order to get back to the fun task of smashing skeleton skulls. While Tiny Tina's Wonderlands doesn't really shake up the Borderlands 3 formula in a major way, it really doesn't need to. With a highly satisfying gameplay loop and some great writing that manages to give both humor and serious moments a chance to shine, Wonderlands is a refreshing homage to RPGs as a whole and a really fun game in its own right. So if you're a fan of the Borderlands series, or the looter-shooter genre in general, I have absolutely no qualms with recommending Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. At the end of the day, I just had a lot of fun playing as store-brand Thor. Thank you guys for watching, and if you enjoyed this, or even if you didn't, please do let me know. If you would like to see more, make sure to subscribe, hit the stupid bell, pet your dragon, and do whatever other nonsense you gotta do these days. Thank you again for watching, and I do hope to see you soon. Bye bye!